Michael Lewis is the author of The Big Short, the #1 bestseller on the subprime mortgage meltdown. Michael, do you believe, as Lloyd Blankfein said, that just one individual is responsible for this alleged fraud? Is it possible that Fabrice Turay is just one bad apple in all this?
It's wildly improbable. I mean, for a start, Goldman Sachs famously doesn't do anything alone. It's such a collaborative enterprise that, and when this transaction took place, when they were essentially designing subprime bonds to explode, to go bad, was at a moment when Goldman itself was obsessed with what it was doing in the market. They were busily trying to bet against the market, and were very aware of what their traders were doing. And finally, you know, what the SEC has alleged Goldman did is something that an awful lot of people were doing. And this isn't a one-off situation. I mean, Goldman had essentially positioned itself in a very esoteric market of side bets on or against subprime mortgage loans, and they sat in the middle of that market for the better part of 2.5 years, and the traders were the ones who called the shots in this. Not this kid who was 27 or 28 years old when he supposedly masterminded this scheme. He would have been trivial in the grand scheme of things. And if you actually look at the marketing documents for this fraudulent deal, his name isn't even at the top. The head trader at Goldman, a guy named Jonathan Turay, name is at the top.
Do you think Goldman understood the long-term consequences of selling these investments?
Did I think they were going to get sued by the SEC? No. I don't think they had any idea it would come to this. Did I think they thought that the market was going to go bad? Yes, but I think at that point they thought they were going to make a lot of money from the market going bad. So they didn't think it was any real concern to them.
You say that they were doing, Michael, what a lot of other people were doing. Do you mean other investment banks?
Yes, I don't think John Paulson, the hedge fund manager who used Goldman to structure these bonds so he could bet against them, was using just Goldman Sachs. I think that other big Wall Street firms were doing the same business, and they were allowing. I mean, more generally, what this is about is that look, the financial Wall Street sort of organized itself around this big bet, and it was, you know, most people were betting on subprime mortgage bonds, and a handful of people were betting against them, and the perverse thing is that the people who were betting against them designed the bets, and they picked the loans they were going to bet against, and the people who were betting on them didn't stop them, and it was and it was a fairly common practice. And this deal was not an unusual deal. I think other Wall Street firms are going to be implicated, and I think other deals at Goldman Sachs are going to come to light.
So you do think it's likely the SEC will widen its investigation to include other people at Goldman and other Wall Street firms?
Absolutely. I think the SEC has essentially launched what amounts to a culture war. I mean, they have, until now, left the bond markets alone. And this catastrophe we've all been living through is a bond market catastrophe. It really has very little to do with the stock markets. And the SEC seems to have, up till now, regarded its brief as regulating the stock markets. It's now moved into the bond market, which has been the Wild West till now. I mean, until now, there has never been. In fact, the striking thing about this complaint is that it's essentially alleging behavior that is ordinary in the bond markets. In the bond markets, it is very easy to rip off your customer, and it happens often. And I think the SEC has decided this needs to stop. But for it to stop, there needs to be a sort of wholesale change in behavior on Wall Street.
Why is the SEC waking up and smelling the coffee at this point in time? Do you think this is politically motivated?
It's a great question. I think, of course, it's politically motivated. The way I'm thinking about it, I mean, I don't know why they decided to do this now, but it seems more than coincidental that it's happening in the middle of the debate about the financial reform bill, and that it has happened not long after Obama said to Wall Street firms, keep your nose out of the financial reform bill, and they declined to listen to him. So I think that basically it's a great big warning shot across the bows of Wall Street firms. And I completely approve of it. I mean, this is something the SEC should have done long ago. And in bringing this sort of behavior to light and in exposing it for the world to see, I think it makes it much more likely that a decent reform bill will pass.
I was going to ask you, what impact do you think this will have on the fight to have greater financial regulation? You think it will move it forward?
I do, but the critical thing is not sort of like, I think a lot of people think more financial regulation or intelligent financial regulation is like beefing up the police force. And while that's important, what really needs to change is some basic rules of the road on Wall Street need to change. I mean, what this SEC suit shows, is that people on Wall Street essentially had an incentive to design design bonds that would go bad. I mean, they had an incentive to disguise risk. They had an incentive to misallocate capital. They had an incentive to underwrite loans that would never be repaid. The incentive systems on Wall Street need to change, and that's going to require a pretty dramatic reform bill. I mean, so for example, one of the things that this episode suggests to me is that it's crazy for Wall Street firms to be able to make bets for their own books on the stocks and bonds they're advising customers to buy and sell. I mean, essentially what Goldman Sachs was doing was designing securities that would go bad so they could bet against them. And this is just, it's a kind of pollution in the financial system. And I think those two functions need to be separated. You need to have firms that make the bets, and you need firms that deal with the customers, but not both under one roof.
So are you saying reinstate Glass-Steagall?
In some form, yes. And I think if you did that, you would, in a stroke, solve the too big to fail problem, because these firms would hive in too. You'd have firms that were essentially like Charles Schwab. They didn't have any positions themselves. They were just advising customers, and without an axe to grind. And then you would have firms that were essentially big hedge funds. You'd have Goldman Sachs proprietary trading group, the group that designed this security that the SEC is now suing them over.
Do you think Wall Street leaders have any understanding about how angry the average person is?
I think they're learning pretty quickly. I've been shocked by how tone deaf they've been. I mean, I thought they could have saved themselves an awful lot of trouble by not paying themselves last year, and I couldn't believe that they didn't do that. It's a machine. Essentially, I think what we're looking at when we look at the financial system is a machine that has run out of control, that the individual people in the machine don't have the control over the machine. So, for example, Goldman Sachs might say, well, it would be awfully wise of us not to pay our people this year because the American public's going to be mad if we're handing out big bonuses right after they've bailed us out. But they then look at their people, and their people are saying, well, if you don't pay us, we're going to walk across the street and go work for J.P. Morgan. In some strange way, Wall Street can't control itself, and so it requires some outside force to step in and control it.
Didn't they at least keep some top executives from getting these mega bonuses, though?
Yeah, but the top executives actually aren't the biggest problem. The biggest problem are the rank and file traders who are taking the risk. There was a cosmetic attempt to control pay at the very top of the Wall Street firms, but it's right through the firms you need to control pay if you're going to encourage sensible approaches to risk.
All right, and we haven't heard the last of this story. How do you think it'll all shake out?
I think that we are in for 6 months of revelations that are going to astonish people about what happened during the subprime boom and bust. I mean, I think that what the public generally senses but don't have the details about is that our financial system has evolved to the point where its interests are actually diametrically opposed to the interests of the economy at large, and and they're going to see a lot more of these sort of revelations come out. It's a story that's just not going to go away.
Michael Lewis, author of The Big Short. Michael, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.